Welcome to the Next Step In podcast, your destination for conversations that explore the power and promise of higher education in Indiana. I'm one of your co-hosts, Joe Glover, and in today's episode, we're honored to be joined by a true champion for students and one of the most influential voices in Indiana higher education. I'm talking about Commissioner Chris Lowery of the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. From bold new policies to statewide initiatives aimed at increasing college-going rates and aligning education with the workforce needs of today, Commissioner Lowery offers a candid and insightful look at where we are and where we're headed. We dig into the challenges, the data, and the real-world impact of the Commission's work across Indiana. Whether you're a student, educator, policymaker, or employer, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. So let's dive in and take the next step together. Commissioner Lowery, first, thank you so much for joining Eddie and I today to talk about higher education in Indiana. And second, I have to note that you will always now have the honor of being our very first podcast guest. So I think we're starting pretty strong.
Oh my goodness, I am honored.
Yeah, no pressure here though. No pressure. You are the first, so you're the standard.
You guys can only go up from here. So yeah.
Well, the honor is all ours, and we'll jump right in because we got a lot of things to talk about and important topics here. And so, one of the things we always talk about with our listeners is we understand that we want to know about the people first, right? Relationships matter in Indiana. You know that, I know that, Eddie knows that, and we're more than just our titles and our work, of course. And sometimes I think it's a good reminder for all of us to think about, put that into perspective a little more. So why don't you tell us a little bit more, maybe our listeners a little bit more about maybe what people don't know about who Chris really is as an individual.
I love that question. The first thing I would say that they don't know who I am, probably, pardon me, on a personal side, my family. That's number one to me, especially these days. Geraldine, who's put up with me for nearly 40 years, that's hard to imagine. And our two grown children, Jared and Jordan. Jared in Detroit works for Ford Motor, and our daughter Jordan, she and her husband, who live 2.3 miles from us. And that's especially important because they have a 5-year-old and 2-year-old. Of course, we love seeing Jordan and Brad, but it's the babies that, we love spending time with. But, I was thinking about a little bit, you said we'd start out personally and, maybe just even share, if I could, just a bit of how I ended up here a little over 3 years ago. It was, it's been a journey for me. I think of my professional life in decades. As I was shared with some young interns a couple of days ago, I spent sort of the first 10 years of my professional life as a policy wonk, although we didn't call that what I did back then, as a policy wonk, mostly around the State House, a little bit in D.C., and then the next 20 years in industry, in business, advanced manufacturing with a publicly traded company here in Indiana, Hill and Brand, great company, love the company, lots of friends there. And then was recruited into higher ed where I, at least at least one or two people, two of you and maybe my mother know that I worked for Ivy Tech Community College, was recruited there to be a senior leader and just absolutely loved it. And made my way here about 3 years ago after being recruited. And, I would say to you, what makes me tick and why I've, been in this work off and on for so many years is that I know the power of higher education and how it changes lives. I've seen it in my own family. I knew 3 of my 4 grandparents, before they passed, and not those 3 exactly, 2 of those 3 and another one who had passed. 3 out of 4 of them did not go past the 7th grade. And, 1 graduated from high school, and that was a game changer. And then in that next generation, that grandparent's son, my dad, was the only one who went beyond high school. They all graduated from high school, but he was the only one who then did something else, and that was to serve an apprenticeship with General Motors. As I've told folks, that was the gateway to the middle class for the Lowery family. And then in the next generation, we all graduated from high school. Everybody did something beyond high school, and I was the first generation to go to college and finish. So, and then later in life, pursued and received my master's degree. And now, our brilliant children who I mentioned, Jared and Jordan, and their significance. Yeah, you know, son has his MBA from Chicago, which he's so much smarter than I'll ever even imagine being. And his girlfriend has her MBA, and then our daughter has her master's, and her husband has his JD. And I say that, and by the way, it is not at all to brag. I am
No.
very proud of all of them, but I see how it's transformed our lives. And I know, frankly, there are a lot of people who are left behind. I think education is the way up. It's the way out. It's the way forward. It transforms. It changes not just, the individual's life and situation, but it really transforms society. And, I've been a great beneficiary of that. I am so fortunate and blessed, to have benefited from education. And so it's a personal thing for me. And then I also view it as a professional, um, calling at this point in my life, that I get to go and do this kind of work every day. So a little bit about me, why I came here to this role. But I lead with family because, at the end of the day, if somebody said, look, Chris, it needs to be somebody else other than you, um, I wouldn't want to walk away from the work because I really enjoy it, and, selfishly get fulfillment from it. But my family would be right there. And end of the day, that's what always matters to me.
Makes a whole lot of sense. And it's kind of funny because you talked about being recruited to that position, and it's a position for those individuals who might be listening that don't know. It's you lead the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. It's a very important job in the state of Indiana, and I'm just kind of curious what made you say yes and inspire you to take on that role, because it is a huge job and a very important one. And just kind of curious when it did come calling, like what said, yeah, you know what, this is something I really want to do. What made you think that?
I have to tell you, I had some hesitation originally. The first person who mentioned it to me, over breakfast, okay, it was my predecessor, Teresa Lubbers. Um, I half jokingly kind of looked over both shoulders and said, "Are you talking to me?" Um, she's also been a dear friend for many years. She's kind of said, "Now stop it. You need to consider this." Well, okay. Um, and as I really thought about it, you know, we'll talk later about the strategy that we've developed. We call it the Hope Agenda. And, there have sort of been ever present for me for a really long time that higher ed really ends up impacting us, and I alluded to it a few moments ago, as individuals, and it ends up impacting us, really, post-secondary training and education, to be clear, as individuals in so many ways, and then societally. Yes, for a strong workforce, for our employers, but it strengthens our communities, it strengthens our state. Um, Joe, you and I've known each other a long time, and I'm a nerd. But the first article I was reading this morning after I got up, and sort of part of my routine, was a very recent column in The Economist. And the reason I mention that is only that the article was talking about the strides that China has made in higher education, especially in the last 2 decades. I raise that because, as we think about it, the individual, and that's sort of the first thing that makes me tick. And then the second being the broader society, communities and states and nations. It, from a competitive standpoint, I think it's critically important that our state be a leader, that our nation be a leader, in, grasping and understanding the value, and especially the transformative nature of higher education. So, yeah, all of those things were in play as I thought about it. And yeah, and really felt like I was supposed to come and do this for however long ended up being appropriate.
I
Yeah,
love
that
that.
calling. Go ahead, Eddie.
No, I was going to say, I love that. And one of the things that we want to discuss on this show is changing the viewpoint of obtaining a post secondary degree as a private investment versus viewing it as a common good. Right. We hope that this show serves as like part of a little catalyst of changing that viewpoint. But one thing that I wanted to hop on here before we get into the main content, Chris, Joe informed me that you are a runner. Is that true?
It is true. Like right now, I'm not because I'm fighting a knee injury. My
Okay.
right knee is bugging me. So I'm doing a lot of walking, a lot of bike riding, and it's killing me not to be out there. I love running, by the way. I know it's hot where you guys are. It's hot here in Indy and so forth. It kills me because I love running in really steamy, hot weather. And yes, I'm a runner though, but yeah, not
There-
today.
Well, I went out and run this morning, and it made me think. There's a great debate in the running community. Do you run with music or not? I'm just interested about the commissioner.
Yeah, so I now I run with it a whole lot more than I used to. And by the way, most of that started during the pandemic because
Okay.
I was just out as much as I could be, and so yeah, I do run with music now.
Well, the people want to know. Give him a song that's on the commissioner's playlist when he's out running the streets of Indy.
Oh my goodness! So I'll give them sort of a real broad cross section here. Um, uh, I love the song "Make Me Wanna" by Thomas Rhett. So there's a
Okay.
countryside song of it. And then I have been a fan of Earth, Wind, and Fire since I was a kid. And there's nothing better to like try to get a PR, which I don't get anymore at my age, but I still strive for them, than fantasy. I mean, it's just such a great,
Yes.
kind of it fills me up. So I have a really broad, eclectic taste in music, and you would see it on my annual top played list from Spotify.
Love it. Love
I'm
it.
telling you right now, your approval rating just went up across the state of Indiana with those answers. So that's some good insight there for us, Commissioner. Commissioner, I'm sitting here thinking, and we've talked a lot about the college attainment rate in the state of Indiana, and the state set an ambitious goal, right? 60% of Hoosiers to attain a post secondary credential by 2025, and that we knew that was aggressive, right? And trying to get there, but with the current rate at around 54%, what's your take on that? Like, how are we progressing? What strategies are we using across the state to try to close that gap? What's working? Maybe what's not? Just kind of curious your perspective of how we move that big. I mean, that's a big thing to move, right? Across the state, it takes a lot of players to do that. So where are we, and kind of how are we doing in those areas?
Um, yeah, Joe, thanks for asking. This is one of my very favorite topics. All the way back to when I, was recruited and interviewing for this role, I put it front and center and said, let's be clear about it. And that was in, 2022 when I came into this role. I said, look, it's pretty apparent we're not going to hit the big goal, and we need to. Our state, I think it's an imperative that we get to at least that goal. When we look at what Georgetown University and others have noted, we're going to require education and training beyond high school exceeding 70% by 2031, I think is their date. So it's imperative. And, I started making some noise about it just a little, around 3 years ago when I came into the role. And give you 30 seconds here. One of the first things we did was to step back and do what many of us would call a situation assessment. So, what's going on? Where are we? How have we been progressing? What are the elements that would drive us toward that? And that was very helpful because it moved us toward developing our strategic plan, which is called the HOPE agenda, and some are very familiar with that. HOPE, the word HOPE, was very intentional. And then it's also an acronym that we created, Hoosier Opportunities and Possibilities Through Education. And I share that with you because the components in there, we're absolutely certain are the pieces that will help drive that post-secondary attainment rate higher. Um, to sound very basic here, we have to have more people, going to college in order to drive that number up. We've got to have more people completing. And then something that maybe both of you know, I know you do Joe. I've been harping on this now for almost 3 years. We've got to get more Hoosiers, individuals who graduate to stay here. Um, so, those are part and parcel to our HOPE agenda. I'll give you the first 5 things really quickly because those are what drive it. We need to improve the college going rate, which is post-secondary, anything training and education beyond high school for youth and adults. We need to improve it very specifically around 3 adult populations, veterans and those in the military, for those with disabilities and the justice involved. All three populations who have some challenges getting there. Uh, but when they do, among other things, they make incredible employees once they've accomplished those things. So that's two. The third is to really focus on and drive credit for prior learning. And that's, for listeners, that's a way to capture an adult's learning, work experiences, training, and so forth, and have those count toward, college and university credentials. To me, it's key to honoring the work that an individual has done. So those three things. Fourth is the rate of completion. We've been improving that over the years here in Indiana, and I'll go ahead and say it. We've come up from, I think we were 14th about the time I came on board. We're 9th now in the nation. I'm really, really pleased about that. And then the fifth big component, as we were just saying, was for graduate retention. And you put all those things together, and we absolutely will improve the attainment rate here in Indiana. I think we'll probably talk here in a little bit about some of the specifics, but I'll hit a few things that we've been doing that I think, and I know we're going to talk about how we think about research and business analytics and things, perhaps here in a little bit if we get time. But with that in mind, something like the post-secondary attainment rate is a lagging number. For your listeners, it takes 2 years before we end up knowing what that number is. That absolutely makes me crazy. So, when we break it out in those 5 components, we've got clearer focus on some specific key objectives. And then when we can home in on key initiatives to drive those strategic objectives, we've got a much better chance of success. So, some examples of things that have really taken off in the last few years and that we've done. We'll dive, I'm sure, into some of them later, but we expanded what is called the Indiana College Core to more high schools. That's a chance for kids to get this block of 30 hours fully transferable to all the public institutions here in Indiana. A lot of the privates are taking it now. By the way, I would say that's because the markets work, and many of the privates are accepting it. That's huge. That saves kids potentially time and money, their families time and money, for the students, who are going to college. We were in only 84 high schools when I came here.
Wow.
And that had taken a decade to get there. Again, that made me crazy. So we put a real focus on it. And today, well, when kids start back to high school next, I guess in August, we'll be at over 300 high schools. I've said we need to be at a minimum of 400. There are roughly 500 high schools, depending on how you count them. So that's one. We started something I know you're familiar with called Indiana Pre-Admissions, where we've been able to get the GPA and SAT scores of juniors in high school. Then we've asked the institutions, you tell us, give us a cut on GPA and or SAT. We marry the data up, and now we're sending letters to first semester high school seniors and separately to their parents and saying, look, here are all the institutions to which you are accepted, would be accepted today. Unbelievable response. First of all, most students and their parents don't even know of all the institutions we're mentioning. And right. And, to me, it opens up a marketplace that's less opaque. There's nothing we're trying to hide in higher ed. It's just the way it's evolved over the years. It's hard to know, where can I get in? What even exists, and so forth. So that has been a push toward that. Some of your listeners probably saw that recently. We leaned into asking the institutions to hold the line on tuition and fees over the next 2 years. It's a first for Indiana. All of our public institutions have agreed to not raise tuition and related fees for 2 years. I think it's the first time in Indiana, and I'm pretty sure it's the only time or the only state in the nation that's doing that right now. Expanded our the push on FAFSA, the federal aid form that, especially if you're a parent of a teenager or if you've been through it yourself, you're familiar with it. We've been able to really ramp that up. We were about 39th in the nation, I think, 3 years ago in those completions, and our latest numbers are that we're around 10th. and certainly I know we'll talk deeper here later about the 21st Century Scholars Program. We took it from, what had been done for 3 decades, which is where we had to chase down kids who would qualify in the 8th grade, which has made no sense to me. And now it's an automatic enrollment. I'll save the impact if we get a chance to dive in deeper there. And then expanding of the Frank O'Bannon grant, which has been a grant geared toward low-income students here in Indiana. It'll have quite an impact because of the expansion we've done of that, especially through this decade.
Well, one of the things you've hit on, and we're definitely going to talk about the 21st Century Scholar, because I know Eddie's got a personal story with that. I think that you'll love to hear, and I think so. We'll definitely talk about that and more about how important that is. But one of the things that you touched on was the 2-year tuition freeze for all the public institutions in the state of Indiana, which here recently obviously has been really big in the news. And I think it's fair to say that higher education, has obviously been in the has been in the legislative spotlight this year in the state of Indiana. And I just kind of am curious, your thoughts and discussions, that are going on around the state about how the landscape seems to be shifting quickly. But it seems like a lot of good work is happening, and it's all about trying to educate, more students with less debt. And I'm just kind of curious about some of the conversations you're having, and because I know our listeners, we see it, we hear it. Hey, there's a lot of change in the higher education landscape from the legislative body. So just kind of curious your take as the commissioner, and how those conversations have been going.
Yeah, and I love this question, Joe. Thank you. Yeah, there are several things that I'll try to reference here. Let's be clear. There's been a narrative for a while in the media and even national media that question the value of higher ed. And frankly, I think we should. I think we should question anything in which we're investing heavily. We were talking earlier about return on investment. And I do often say to students, and or their families, look, this is an investment. And if you think about it, whether you're going to go buy a new car, our daughter and son-in-law are going to get a new car, and they're investigating. They're really researching and taking their time, which I think is great. They're not inexpensive. Or if you're going to go buy a home, you really thoughtfully think about it. Or if you're working on the strategy for your 401k investment, you really spend some time with that, and oftentimes even get some help in doing that. Well, this is the same thing. It's an investment. You've got to spend some time. And, I received a call from somebody at the Wall Street Journal a year and a half or two ago, who had heard we were raising a lot of noise about the college going rate. And I said, well, yeah, we are. And specifically about men and the decline of that, and, concern I have and others have about it. And we're talking about how the value perception. He said to me, well, why do you think people have this value perception challenge? And I kind of laughed, and I said, you do read your own paper, don't you? And he went, what do you mean? I said, you've had front page profile articles that lead people to think that higher education is about getting some weird graduate degree from Columbia or the University of South Carolina, or of University of Southern California, and that you owe $250,000 and you couldn't get a part-time job pouring coffee in Indiana. And he said, well, I said, no, like you've done that in your paper, the New York Times and others. And I said, here's the reality. In Indiana, the wage premium between a high school diploma holder and a bachelor's degree holder is over 80%. And the average undergrad debt, if the person has debt, is less than $28,000, which is about the price of a new Kia. I know which one holds its value and grows. And with respect to anybody who has a Kia, right? Any new car just depreciates, right? And right, so that's a challenge, and I think that is something where policymakers, have been tuned to. However, we also know that we have to be better in higher ed of offering value, right? We've got to be thinking about the price. We've got to be thinking about the outcomes that come with it. And I know we're going to talk about some legislation here in a minute, but we have to do our job both as an agency and as higher ed institutions of saying, look, do we have value? Is what you're offering good at the kind of price that you're expecting, and can people afford it? We've made a real focus, those 5 areas that I was talking about earlier in our strategic plan, to not lose sight of ever accessibility and affordability. And, I got to tell you, I am so delighted pleased, proud of the institutions, every one of the public institutions buying in and saying, look, we're going to hold the line on tuition and fees. We can do this. Indiana can stand alone in this. I think that's a big deal. You know, when I think about the conversations we have around, what does higher ed result in? We created a couple of years ago something that I refer to as the 4x4s. Uh, 4 distinct ways to look at economic outcomes and 4 distinct ways to look at social outcomes, depending upon the levels of education you receive. And it's fairly simple, and this is the way they typically break out in data: less than a high school diploma, a high school diploma, some college or an associate degree, or a bachelor's degree and higher. So those 4 levels. What I can tell your listeners is, actually, we've been doing this 3 years now, because we started shortly after I came into this role. We've been collecting and utilizing this data every month since that time. And in these 4 economic areas, there has not been a statistical aberration. Each month in that time, what we've been able to see is that with each level of higher educational attainment, the results are better. Here are the categories. Unemployment rate. In the most recent one that I'm looking at right now, unemployment is 4.5 times higher for individuals with less than a high school diploma than a bachelor's degree. And it scales across there. Labor participation rates. They jump by about 10% across each one of those, from mid-40s, mid-50s, mid-60s, and the low to mid-70s. If we moved people in each one of those categories, we would not have a labor problem or a labor shortage in any category if we could do that. Median wages, again, it's astounding. And then net wealth accumulation, it's by multiples, right? Like multiples. And then the social metrics, which we think are also very interesting. Same way, no statistical aberrations since we've been tracking. Utilization of SNAP, which is the food assistance program. Give you an idea there, in a bachelor's degree home versus less than a high school diploma, it's 8x, 8 times higher when you go from one end of the scale to the other. And it, scales across that. Utilization of Medicaid. I think this is especially timely. They're talking about Medicaid in the federal budget. Our own state saw a hole that was put in the budget because of an anticipated $1.6 billion expansion of the need for Medicaid. Well, in Medicaid, in the instance of Medicaid, in a home, or individuals with bachelor's degree utilize Medicaid about 7% of the time, about 7%. People with a high school diploma, it's 28%. It's 41% for less than a high school diploma, right? These are facts, and they speak to the results for individuals, for human beings, for their families. Infant mortality, it's 3 times higher in a home with some individuals who have less than a high school diploma versus bachelor's degree. And again, it scales across those. And then the big one that I think gives everyone pause every time I mention it is, from one end of that to the other, a 14-year difference in life expectancy. Right? So when we talk about the value, we can do ROI analyses, and people should, especially when they're thinking, where am I going? What am I going to do? What do I want to study? And so forth. And what their interests are. My goodness, fit up with what your interests are, however you might. But the results are real. The outcomes are improved. This past legislative session that ended about 2 months ago, we went to the legislature, we went to the governor, went to legislature, and pursued Senate Enrolled Act 448. And you're talking about things that have been in the news with legislature and policymakers. Senate Bill 448 did a variety of different things, but one of the things in which I was probably the most interested was we formally have codified a new degree program approval and review process. let me be really clear. I think our institutions are amazing. I may be the chief cheerleader for the public and private institutions in Indiana. Somebody calls me that, I'm fine with that. And that said, I also want us to be offering the best value possible. And over the last 30 years or so, there's sort of been a proliferation of degrees. Uh, some of the times what happens is when you have so many, there's really almost nobody that enrolls in some of them, and then might not complete either. So, what are those? What are the low-hanging fruit that we could say, do we really need that? But then what we also sought in the legislation was on a regular cycle, uh, every 10 years by the commission, and a separate bill every 7 years by the institutions, but to look at things like enrollment trends, completion trends, uh, debt trends. What's the debt associated with pursuing something? But then all things that are really important, like additionally important, like how it aligns to the marketplace. You know, basic supply and demand analyses, placement analyses. What are the chances of placement? Um, what do wage outcomes look like? I think we're the first state that has adopted a process to do this, and we're literally in the midst of doing it right now. Um, but our just on the public institution side, we have grown to over 3,400 different degree program options. It's around another 3,000 at the private, so, right? So you think about a couple of different things. One, how does a consumer, prospective student, even sort through all that, um, and then provide mechanisms to look at uh, the outcomes that are going to result. But then also, frankly, in any enterprise, whether that's a business or whether that's in higher ed, when you have a proliferation of so much of an offering, at some point, things like quality and the way they're delivered and the cost and so forth suffer. It's just a natural thing. It's not a distinctly higher ed thing at all. Um, that's just a natural, basic business principle. So we're really excited about that because we think it really gives everyone the chance to step back and go, okay, yeah, how could we address this? Some that an institution might choose to eliminate. Of course, they'll make provisions so that anyone who's in the program, they call it a teach out, is allowed to finish her his program. Consolidating some of those into you know single degrees that have then uh, concentrations and things like that. So yeah, that's one of the things that came that we think is going to be beneficial for the student especially.
Well, one of the things I wanted to bring up is, working on a college campus myself, I tell you that one of the positive things that I have seen come out of just what you were just talking about is really the creativity that's going on right now. I see collaboration across multiple different, schools on campus that are looking at, how can we work together more collaboratively, and some of that work was already happening before this legislation passed, but just seeing some of that come out of this, I am kind of excited about what new things we're going to discover and new collaborations we're going to have based on some of this work that's happening on our campuses around the state right now.
And Joe, thanks for saying that. I think I'm on campuses a lot. I love being on campuses. I love connecting with students most of all, but I also really enjoy my time that I get to spend with faculty and administrators and others. And I've been hearing similar feedback, around collaboration and partnering. And I think frankly it's going to spur innovation in the way we all serve. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Commissioner, I think you brought up a lot of great points there. And I think we as a state and we as higher ed professionals need to continue to work on the marketing efforts of sharing some of these facts with stakeholders in the community so they better understand the value of a post-secondary degree attainment. When we look at unemployment rate, labor participation, net wealth, and all of these factors for an average debt of $30,000, it's an incredible ROI, and it's pretty much in my opinion, a no-brainer. And now's a good time to say that this episode is brought to you by the 2025 Kia Sorento. Just kidding, Kia. We like you, Kia. But Commissioner, I did want to touch on one part of those perspectives, right? When we're talking about the perspective of affordability. And the national perception is college is way too expensive, nobody can afford it, and the ROI is not great. However, if we zoom in and we look at Indiana institutions and how affordable our schools are in comparison to the other 50 states, can you touch on that a little bit for our listeners?
Of that question, Eddie. All around. So I'm going to start with the first thing, which is Indiana, based on a variety of different metrics, is one of the most affordable states in the nation for higher education. Strata Education Foundation, or to your listeners, a really well-known and highly respected organization, does a lot of research and so forth. Puts our state in the top 10. I think it's actually top 8 category of affordability. That's incredible. Very similarly, by the way, we came upon a number a couple of years ago because I was really poking on trying to understand what was happening with the movement of students, both to our state and then out of our state after graduation. And we are 8th best in the nation at attracting students from out of state. I think that's phenomenal. With all due respect to U.S. News and the Wall Street Journal and Forbes and others who do all the college rankings, I always read them. Everybody else does too. I always look at those. They're interesting, and they're also subjective. The ways in which they are analyzed are subjective. As I always say to folks, I am an unapologetic, unabashed fan of the free market. And to me, part of the reason I am is because the market is brutally honest. And consumers across the United States have said Indiana is one of the best places you can go for a higher education based on value, right? Which is really, what am I getting out of it relative to what I'm paying for it? And that we're 8th in the nation. Now you guys and your listeners and I don't know, like 23 other people in Indiana know it, right? We're trying to tell everybody that this is a great value here. Indiana's been leading the way. Yes, the institutions really stepped up for the next 2 years and said, look, let's hold it flat. But out of the last, I think, 10 or 12 years, Indiana institutions have been 6th in the nation at holding down tuition and fees, right? So Indiana's institutions have not just been sitting idly and, going, well, we'll just push these costs along. Not at all the case. And then, of course, I know we're going to get back to talking a little bit about the 21st Century Scholars and the Frank O'Bannon grant, but Indiana is also a top 10 state for need-based financial aid. And more than half of our students qualify for need-based financial aid. And I would say this too, that where we saw some drops, especially between about 2012 and 2022 in the college going rate, so a drop in the number of students going, especially from high school to something post-secondary, almost all of that drop was by low-income students. And, that is particularly concerning. And, that's part of the reason a big part of the reason we've taken those actions around the 21st Century Scholars Program and the Frank O'Bannon Scholarship, so that even though and while we're holding costs down here in Indiana and we're, highly competitive, we've still got to keep, the foot on the gas pedal to make sure that especially those students have the opportunity that, I know this, the 3 people who are talking today have seen the fruits of, and probably most of the folks who are in our circles of friends and family, that's also the case.
It's funny you say that because Eddie, I know that I'm not sure if you're aware, but Eddie's a secondary, he works on a large high school here in the state of Indiana, here in the southern part of the state, and he sees this often. He's got a personal story with 21st Century Scholar Program. So, Eddie, do you want to talk a little bit about that, about your personal story and about what you're seeing every day, even in the high school level now, when you're dealing with seniors and kind of this affordability question?
Oh, absolutely. And one thing, Commissioner, I'm really happy that you brought up some of those national publications that impact the perception of the value of higher education. And unfortunately, I think, and you may disagree, but I think unfortunately, sometimes people don't look at the metrics that are used when we look at those rankings. And sometimes if you look at those, and I'm not going to call out any of the publications, but one of them, the metrics is the academic level of the incoming freshman class. you get more points depending on the academic level of the incoming freshman class. And that's never made sense to me.
Either.
Like, in my opinion, that's like judging a hospital on the health of the incoming patients, right?
Right.
Like, I don't care about that as much. Let me know, are they better when they get out? Like, and that's what I care about.
Exactly. Outcomes matter, right? Inputs are interesting. Outcomes are what actually matter at the end of the day.
Right. Or you get more points if your alumni donates money to the school. Well, that doesn't tell me the value of the chemistry department. Like, so anyway, I don't think enough attention is made to those metrics.
I agree.
Yeah. But yeah, Joe was talking about the 21st century and the high school alignment and the affordability. And as he said, I do work at a large public high school here in Southern Indiana. And I am happy to report that almost 40% of our graduates of this year's cohort either achieved the ICC or an AGS. And
That's
yeah, we had
amazing.
113 ICCs and 46 associate degrees earned while in high school, which changes the entire dynamic when we're talking about affordability. And I'm sure you're going to get into this, but one of the things that are pieces of legislation that I'm so proud of in the state of Indiana is the fact that now students are automatically enrolled in 21st century. And for those who are unfamiliar with 21st Century Scholars Program, I'll let the commissioner dive into a little bit about that. But it used to be where families had to sign up. And this process, if they go through the 4 years, could result in tuition being covered at a public college or university. And I come from a low-income family, Commish. I was a 21st century scholar, and I should have been a 21st century scholar, I should say. Unfortunately, my grandfather didn't know about it. And by the time I got to my sophomore year, I was meeting with my school counselor, and she was like, "Well, you're 21st century, right?" And I was like, "I don't think so." And unfortunately, I wasn't. And it was just because he didn't know about it. So the fact now that you all that we as a state are automatically enrolling these students is absolutely huge. So with all that being said, would you mind touching on the 21st Century Scholars Program now and its impact on Hoosiers in our state?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. First of all, though, Eddie, congratulations for the work you're doing at the high school. I, I say it, and I really, really mean it. The things you were talking about, like the College Core and students achieving that, it's life changing. For your listeners, that block of 30 hours that's fully transferable to all of our public institutions, and many of our privates accept it now, right? That's a full year that you can either, shave off the 4 years that you're going to take, or maybe as a result of that, be able to do better while you're there, or some blend thereof. Um, that has real impact. And the 21st Century Scholars Program, um, gosh, I pause every time somebody talks about it. I was with students, actually, it was yesterday, interns at an organization here in town, and I got ready to talk about the 21st Century Scholars Program. And I said, anybody familiar with it? Everybody, almost all of them raised their hands. And then somebody who works for the organization said, and raise your hand if you are a 21st Century Scholar. There were 3 in the room. And oh man, I mean, I was just delighted. The college going rate, so post high school in Indiana, the most recent numbers are 53%. It's 83% for 21st Century Scholars. Their low income peers, the kids who in the past have not gotten signed up, is 30%. Oh my gosh. I mean, right? We should just pause and let those numbers sink in. 83% versus 30% because a kid didn't get signed up. I said yesterday, and I mean it, there's a policy discussion here. There's an economic discussion here. There's a social discussion here. The kind of data I was talking about earlier. This is a moral discussion in my book. To know that, which we really didn't have a good handle on. But as we started asking questions, 3 years ago now, one of the things I learned very early on was that we were only signing up about, just slightly under 50% of the eligible students. And I'm not even sure how to tell you how I thought about that and reacted to it. It was just, I was stunned. And so we started poking on it, and, I don't know, new guy to the role, right? I said, so now make sure I understand, low income students. So tell me the qualifiers for that. And they said, basically kids who are on free and reduced or qualify for free and reduced lunches. And I went, oh, okay. I said, so we know who the kids are, right? Yes, we do. Uh-huh. So shouldn't we just automatically enroll them? And right. And by the way, I wasn't the first to think this. Other people had, folks who were so glad to sponsor the legislation, others who wanted to support it. One of the people who I was posing this to said, "Well, there'll be a fiscal impact," and I kind of said, "Yeah, thanks for stating the obvious here. Yes, if more young people are able to go, it will cost more to go." And I said, we're going to do something called dynamic scoring when we think of legislation now. Yes, we've got to have the expense forecast, but I want to know a forecast from this agency on return on investment. And I'll tell you, it at one point almost became humorous at the legislature then, that legislative session in 2023, because people were talking about the numbers we provided, that the average student, there will be a 10x just on the improved wages in his or her lifetime. So take the original investment times 10, and that's just the delta, not the total wages, just the delta, the change in wages over the lifetime, right? And then the tax receipts that increase for state and local government, right? It just became so incredibly logical. But I'll also point this out, though, because I think it's really important, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about this, partnerships and just the incredible importance of partnership. Yeah, we and a few other people kind of sounded the alarm on that, and asks folks to author and sponsor the legislation, and it passed, I think, unanimously, except for a stray vote here or there. All the committees and the House and Senate and all that good stuff. But it became a bill that was, quote, owned, unquote, by a variety of organizations, from chambers of commerce to community-based organizations to, right, you name it. People were behind it, and I give all of them the credit for it being successful. So we were able to implement this automatic enrollment of these kids in the 8th grade in 2022. Give your listeners an idea of the impact. In 2022, when it was the old way, where we had to kind of chase kids down, get them signed up, hope that a 14-year-old would get a form home because they're the most responsible people on the earth, right? Oh, wait. Right. And mom and dad don't have anything else going on. Oh, wait, they do, work and family life and everything else. We were only able to get about 20,000 kids signed up in 2022 under the old form, under the old rules. On June 30th of 2023, which was the technical end of 8th grade for kids that year, we did our first automatic enrollment electronically, and we signed up over 46,000 kids. Right? So from 20 to 46,000. The next year, we signed up over 50,000. The cohort of kids was a little bigger. We don't know the numbers yet. We'll know soon, very soon here in a few days. Right. But going from 20,000 to 45, 50,000, that becomes life-changing. And it becomes life-changing not just for one or two people, but for thousands. And, the cohort of 2027 seniors who are graduating, that's when we'll see this influx. And they're doing really, really well. I know you guys both know there's something students have to complete during high school. It's called the Scholar Success Program. I call it the good student and good citizen checklist, maintain a minimum GPA, do career planning, fill out the FAFSA, stay out of trouble, just like all those things any of us would tell our children, and hopefully someone told us along the way, nudged us along the way. And even the percentage of students who are getting that done now, because we've refocused our own agency on how to really support and work with the schools and how to really support and work with the students and their families, that has skyrocketed. So anyway, you picked out literally, if someone said, pick out one thing, Chris, in the last 3 years and 2 months, I'd say that's really easy. And I would say for somebody who's had a roughly 40-year professional career, it is the number one thing that I've ever gotten to be involved in, um, by measure.
And it's going to have a huge impact, and it's going to continue to have an impact, which is why we're talking, and one of the reasons why we started this podcast, right? We want to really lift this up. Like you said, we've read too many articles in different publications bashing higher ed. We want to really highlight the value and highlight what it is doing and how it does change lives. So thank you. But one of the things that you've done so well, and really it helps us, is the data-driven approach that you've really have really led there at the Commission for Higher Education. I'm just kind of curious, that data is so important as we tell the story and we really kind of show the impact. How can't even speak now. How transformative has it been in influencing your policy decisions and improving student outcomes there around the state for using this more data informed approach?
Joe, thank you. And by the way, thank to you and Eddie for lifting up this work, and not just what we're doing at the commission, but more broadly what you're doing. We have got to have more access to conversations like this amongst our public. Great podcasts like this to listen to. Y'all are doing a really great service for our state, and so I'm delighted. Joe, you knew I would be when you called me and told me you were going to be doing this. I'm like, yes, this is awesome. I'm only jealous that I don't get to do it with you every time you do this. But so yeah, when I came to the commission, I mentioned we did this situation assessment. So what do we do well? What do we not? What could be changed? And so much of my belief in public policy is that much of what we do is complex, but it's not complicated. Like complicated says I can apply a math formula and hey, look, bingo, it'll be better. Because there's so many different elements to it, much of what we do is complex. And to that, the point I mean in that is, we have to assess what we're doing and really understand where the challenges are or where there's something that's really good, say 21st century scholarship, and really expand it. Like how can we put like jet fuel in this and really make it fly? So one of the things that, I started to realize fairly quickly after coming into the role 3 years ago was that our approach, which had served us as a state of having a research department here, wasn't really fulfilling what we needed. That, we produced 7 reports a year. I was probably one of 12 or 15 people who actually read them in the state. Thank you. I am a nerd about this stuff. But the reports were also very lagging in their data. Most of it 2-year data, and just to be really blunt about it, I'm not really sure how to run an enterprise or lead an enterprise based on 2-year-old data, let alone set public policy or help inform public policy with that kind of data. So to put this indelicately, we literally blew up what we were doing and directed ourselves toward creating a business intelligence team. And in that, I saw the purpose to really help us drive public policy with always having an eye on the outcomes to it. And also then for our own enterprise here, the commission, where we, employ individuals to do this work on behalf of the public, to have us working every day on those things that could make a difference. And when they didn't and don't, then to not do them, to move them along somewhere else, but not expend our time on it. So in that, what did we do? So we created this team, brought in somebody who's just brilliant, Brooke Kyle. We stole her from Marian University, who has built this incredible business intelligence team. And if you think about it from this standpoint, we believe we start with data, and there's an abundance of it. We start with data, put it in some type of format that we can look at and understand it. I have to tell your listeners, I'm a bar chart preference oriented person. I think they tell you so much or can tell you so much, but starting with the data, then asking ourselves every time, what is the insight? And we ought to be able to describe that very briefly. From that, how might that inform our strategy? And then from strategy, what are the key objectives? By the way, to your listeners, if you think of the HOPE agenda, those first 5 things, those are the key objectives. Very measurable. Then from the objectives, those initiatives. So think of the college going rate. That's our number 1 on the HOPE agenda, strategic objectives. Within that, we're focusing on enrollment, which, by the way, for your listeners, has increased in Indiana the last 2 years after a decade of decline. And then within that enrollment, how are we doing on specific things like expanding the Indiana College Core, doing the pre-admissions, lifting up and improving what we're doing with FAFSA and so forth. So coming down into key initiatives, assigning specific responsibilities, breaking that down, by the way, just to tell your listeners, those goals of the HOPE agenda, each one is owned by 2 members of my cabinet, a primary lead and a secondary. And literally they are ready to talk about an answer to any of those at any moment of any day. Then some of the initiatives that I mentioned to you, those are bucketed by those key objectives. So the college going rate or completions or grad retention, those are bucketed. Individuals on our team, each person on our team has at least 3 annual metrics that tie all the way back to those HOPE agenda goals. Those are the principal elements of their annual and quarterly reviews. And by the way, we share everyone's goals and performance thereof with everyone in the organization.
I love it because what you measure matters, right? And what you measure gets done. I think that's the other thing that we see, and we obviously have seen that in the data so far, and it's continuing to show that way.
Joe, thanks for saying that. And by the way, the other thing that I think when you institute something like that, it's a little wonky at first. People are going, kind of wondering, oh boy, that's very specific, and how will I ever do that? And by the way, I set really high goals in working with our leaders. Like stretch is what we're supposed to do. Well, what's happened is, because we've also been working diligently on how we think about our culture here, other team members are stepping up, right? And saying, hey, how can I help with that? Hey, I'm in marketing. How could I help with that? Or, hey, I'm on the outreach team. How could I help you with your goal? And it's just been a kick to get to see how the teammates, you talked about, both of you, collaboration earlier, to watch that organically taking place. I'll give your listeners one small example. So about enrollment and, filling some of those things. One of the folks on our team, Ty, owns our next generation Hoosier Educator scholarships. So scholarships that are available for somebody who wants to become a teacher in Indiana. And we were wanting to expand the application pool to get more people interested, a more competitive, group from which to choose and so forth, and uses energy maybe to expand it, and so forth. Well, Ty, who has responsibility for this, had shared with her supervisor, then shared with me, that the best we had ever done was to get about just shy of 600 applications in an annual, on an annual basis, 598 to be exact, by the way. Everyone knew that I wanted to go off and say, let's set stretch objectives, because I shouldn't and don't want to do everybody's objectives, right? They're individual ones. Well, never above 600, right? They came back and said, we're going to try for 700. And I went, yes, that's great. That's like, 16% increase, 17% increase, 700. Well, here's the punchline. At the end of her cycle of measure on that, she was delighted, caught me in my office and said, so 598 was where we were. 700 was the goal. Chris, 958. Right?
There we go.
Yeah. And now, and the best part too was, Ty was able to show everybody, look, like we can do this. But her colleagues stepped up. Her outreach coordinators, who probably work with you guys some, who work with high schools and others, said, hey, we can help you with that. The marketing people said, hey, here's a way we can help message that and lift that up. And the business intelligence team had said, hey, we can help break down some data to help you, So anyway, I get very geeked up about it, but it has become a really important component of what we're doing at the agency and how we're trying to work, broadly in the higher ed ecosystem with our partners. We have great partners, in the institutions, but then so many other organizations that, come alongside us. And I just always hope that they see us coming alongside them too.
Well, it's great leadership. And I think one of the things, anyone that's listening that has a podcast on leadership, they should have Chris on to talk a little bit more about this and then how you do this work, because I think it is so important. And it's something that another piece of nugget that I think all organizations that are trying to make change can utilize. So kudos to you in that work. And I know that we see it, and that's very important. I know we're going to be wrapping up here soon. We could probably talk to you for 4 hours, to be honest, Chris, and hopefully we'll have you back again. This won't be your last time. We'll have you back to talk about some more issues. But one of the things that I really wanted to get to before we wrap up today is really this whole idea of workforce alignment, economic development, and the work that we're really doing in Indiana, because I think there's a lot of great work happening on the college campuses that, maybe hasn't been, I don't know, maybe front of mind as much as it has been in the most recent years. But, when we look around the state of Indiana and and really think about our economic and workforce needs, particularly in high demand sectors, we've got life sciences, microelectronics. We've got biosciences. I mean, there's a lot of really high demand next generation jobs that are going to be located here in the state of Indiana, and we know that we need the talent to be able to fill those jobs. And so, what I've been really encouraged by is really the work that's happening on our higher education campuses, thinking through that, and with the strategy provided by the Indiana Commission for Higher Education as well, kind of recognizing, how do we make all that line up and sync up, and also how, and you mentioned it earlier a little bit about credit for prior learning. How can we help? There's a lot of good education that's happening at a lot of these organizations. How can we award credit for that and be able to recognize some of the learning that's happening there to be able to help people kind of move quicker or skill up or get ready for that next opportunity. So I just kind of wanted to, I kind of teed you up there a little bit, but just kind of talk a little bit about that workforce alignment and economic development going on and how important that is for the future of Indiana.
Yeah, so I love talking about this, Joe and Eddie. We have been embracing that as part of our mission. On a personal note, so things people wouldn't know and probably don't even care about, but all the way back to my undergrad days, kind of a silly 30-second story. As I was completing my undergrad and getting ready to go look, a professor invited me to join him and some friends on a spring break trip our senior year of college. My first answer to him was, "Thank you, but no thank you. My buddies and I, three best friends of mine and I, were going to Florida." Imagine that, right? And anyway, long story short, he convinced me. And I had a real interest all the way back then, honest to goodness, no kidding, in workforce. And there was a guy who had written a piece of legislation that resulted in something that was called the Job Training Partnership Act. It was the federal workforce program. Uh, Dan Quayle, who was our U.S. Senator at the time, had co-authored that with Ted Kennedy, which I also thought was really interesting. A very conservative, very liberal, you know, policymakers who came together, imagine that, and did this legislation. And I had great interest because my concentrations as an undergrad were, now we call it human resources, were labor relations and personnel management, and I loved workforce. So yeah, I had written a paper for one of my classes on the Job Training Partnership Act, submitted that as my writing sample to work for Dan Quayle. And, as they say, a little bit, the rest was history. But I literally had that interest all the way back then, and also had a lot of that responsibility when I was at Hillenbrand, especially in my last 5 years. So on a personal basis, this has always been important to me. So some things that we've pushed in the last couple of years that I know we're starting to see the fruits of the labor on. 2 years ago in the legislative session, the General Assembly, and the governor agreed to move what is called Career and Technical Education, or CTE, for those of you in the high school space, especially, over to the commission. And I will tell you, I had been pushing for that all the way back to my time leading the workforce side of Ivy Tech Community College, because I thought it made so much blasted sense. That we could have alignment with CTE in the secondary and post-secondary space, that it ought to be seamless, that it ought to be so smooth to do. One of the things that we've done is to be able to align the CTE strategic plan with the Commission for Higher Education's strategic plan, which of course is known as the HOPE agenda. So that is one thing that we've been able to accomplish. And I'm already seeing, how that's benefiting at the high school and at the college level. We referenced earlier and talked earlier about Senate Enrolled Act 8. This was the one that, we were seeking. I was seeking components of it that would, seek a more robust and, I think, thoughtful and thorough process to review degree proposals and degrees on, as we come around and do those on a cyclical basis. The primary, the most important aspect of which to me was to really look at the market supply and demand. So the workforce needs of today and tomorrow, to look at how we were doing, to also incorporate into their work-based learning components. So when we do these reviews now we will be doing them effective July 1 for new degree programs or for those that are going to come up for review, we're really going to want to understand, how is work-based learning incorporated? How is credit for prior learning incorporated? All of that has got to be considered now in what we're doing. And again, we talked about credit for prior learning earlier. That's one of those I just think, gosh, it's just the right blasted thing to do. And then, the work-based learning component, one, statistics show us, I think it was the Strata Foundation and Gallup a few years back that showed just this incredibly high percentage of individuals who have a college internship or co-op, some formal work-based learning experience, that result in a job offer by that employer. It's really high, but on the other hand, I used to run those programs at Hillenbrand, and to me, it was always the best way for a student to test drive us and for us to test drive the student, right? And see if there was a fit. And then, of course, and hopefully most importantly, the ability for the student to learn something and to grow in a way that she or he might not have had the chance to do in a classroom. So, we're embedding those things. And I also think they really just terrifically and crisply align with the new, the high school redesigned diplomas, where we have the focus on enrollment, employment, and enlistment as a student goes through high school. Work-based learning components in those, which I think, again, are just terrific. And I would add too, this, because I've made it germane here talking about the new high school diplomas, but we were also able to get codified with legislation this session that any student who gets the new high school diploma that's focused on enrollment, so the enrollment diploma that is called an Honors Plus, so which includes high degrees of preparation for this move to college someday, are going to be automatically accepted at all of our state institutions, all of our state public institutions, automatically. And to me, that all aligns with the workforce side of what we're trying to do, and it aligns with what we're trying to do with individuals. And I've got to mention these last two. I talked about in the HOPE agenda, those 5 things that, we're doing to get to those, to that attainment goal, right? The going rate, focus on adults, credit for prior learning, completions, and graduate retention. Well, the 2 pieces that bring it together for me, and I think for all of us, are what we call numbers 6 and 7. The 6th one, by the way, our goal is by 2030 to be a top 10 state in all of those, making, various degrees of progress. We're further than on some than we are on others. But the 6th and 7th really bring all of this together to be a top 10 state by 2030 in terms of economic and social mobility and prosperity. Economic and social mobility and prosperity. So those measures that we were talking about earlier, and, mobility is important. And can we help someone prosper? By the way, that's measurable, and we use those measures. They're provided by the OECD, the Organization for Economic Coordination and Development, the developing countries of the world. And Indiana is currently ranked 40th out of 50. But we also don't have to move those metrics a whole lot to really shoot ahead of a lot of states. It's compared at the national and then what they call the subnational level. And all of those other things, feed into that. And then the last one, tying right back to what you're asking about, Joe, with workforce, is that Indiana aspires to be a top 10 state by 2030 as a place to grow your enterprise, start your enterprise, or bring and relocate your enterprise based solely on the strength of human capital. We knock it out of the park from regulatory environment, a taxation environment, infrastructure environment. I've lived here 62 of my 63 years. I think quality of life. I think Indiana's a wonderful place to be. And we also can be a top state from a human capital standpoint. And that, of course, ties us back to where we started, which is with post-secondary attainment. And to me, that brings us full circle to your question around workforce, Joe.
Well, thank you so much, and that really did. That was kind of a great way to tie it all back together. And I guess I'll ask you kind of my final question here for today that I think is kind of that big picture question. What message would you share with Hoosiers who are listening to this podcast or considering taking that next step in their educational journey? They know somebody in their family that maybe wants to go back and finish that degree, or they or they want to have this conversation, or maybe they have someone in their family they're just trying to encourage to think about their next steps in their life. What message would the commissioner for the Indiana Commission for Higher Education give them to encourage them and to really get them to consider that?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I would encourage anyone. The words that we chose to create the HOPE acronym are real. They're about opportunities and possibilities, and there are so many wonderful opportunities and possibilities through higher education. I've talked about the metrics that literally the outcomes that accrue and can accrue to someone from an economic standpoint, from a social standpoint, whether that's much higher wages, whether that's living longer, having, being healthier, all of those things, lower unemployment. So the results are real. I would also say, treat it as an investment because it is. And whether it's coming directly out of your pocket or whether it's a grant or a scholarship, treat it as an investment. And in doing so, do your research. It's part of the reason we started the pre-admissions program to help Hoosier high school students and their families understand all these great options of public and private schools we have in Indiana. We are so fortunate. We have great institutions, but do your research. Where would be the right fit for you? Where would the fit be best for you from an economic standpoint? For the cost side of it that you and or others are going to have to help bear. Where are you trying to go? What are the things you aspire to do? Also, though, don't constrict yourself to think that, boy, if I pick direction X, that's what I've got to do for the rest of my life. Gosh, I am so fortunate. I've been a beneficiary. Yeah, my undergrad was in public policy. My graduate degree was in business school. But gosh, I've gotten to walk back and forth across a lot of those lines. But fundamentally, what are you trying to learn? What are those goals that you're trying to achieve? Treat it again as an investment. Ask yourself, what kind of return am I looking for? And by the way, that's not just from the dollar standpoint, but what is it I'll be able to do? And yeah, I think some of the things I would keep in mind, because I'm going to ask your listeners to do this, is if they're thinking about or helping a loved one, consider doing that. I have 2 requests for you. Do that in Indiana. And then when you or the loved one completes, stay in Indiana. I've already talked about it. We're keeping tuition and fees flat. We're the only state that's doing it. And we're already one of the most affordable in the nation. And we're also, one of the best in terms of quality education that someone can receive, where people come here because we have something really good to offer. I always tell folks, we don't have any ocean beaches or mountains, but we have great higher ed institutions. So people flock here for them. So all I would ask you is do your research, be thoughtful about it, know there's a return on investment that can really accrue to you and your loved ones. By the way, your loved ones and your community. I think that's critically important to note. And as I said, please do that here. And when you're done, please stay here, right here in Indiana.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I wish we can continue this discussion. I agree with you. I think we could talk for 3 or 4 hours without a problem. Again, those listeners, pursue that degree, graduate, stay here, and then make sure you subscribe to the Next Step In podcast. That's the other thing that I would add to it. But all seriousness, Commish, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I love the fact also, and I just need to make mention of this, that all three of us are first gen college graduates. So again, the impact of pursuing a degree. But for far too long, it kind of feels like, we're all sports fans on this call right now. So it kind of feels like higher ed is been under attack. So it's almost like the rope-a-dope Muhammad Ali fans.
Right.
Like we've taken some hits and now it's time to push back. Right. And we need, to let people know the value of pursuing a degree.
Well, Eddie and Joe, thank you. And yeah, I would encourage listeners to, sign up for and tell all your friends and family for Next Step In.
Love it.
Oh,
Commish, we appreciate you.
much. Yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thanks for the time. We'll see you again here soon.
Thank you, guys.
Well, Mr. Bobbitt, that was our first guest, and I think it went pretty well.
Yeah, I think it went absolutely the way that we wanted it to. What great insights from the commish on. There was a lot of data to unpack throughout that episode, but it was all like incredibly insightful. One of my favorite philosophers, Jay-Z, once said, "Men lie, women lie, numbers don't." And if more people would look at the numbers as far as the benefits of earning a degree, the higher lifetime earnings, the lower unemployment rates, the increased job opportunities, the longer lifespan, right? And then also add to the affordability of it here in the state of Indiana, I think more people will wake up.
I think that's the thing that really drives me nuts, honestly. And we talked about it so much on this episode about the narrative out there about higher education, and and again, I think that the biggest thing I want people to think about is there are different types of higher education institutions out there. There's a right one for every individual, and most of them are not what you hear about. The ones that you hear about are the ones that maybe are for a certain type of individual. It's probably not it would definitely not be the majority of individuals. So I think that would be the thing I would leave people with as they think about everything that happens, to really think about the types of institutions that are out there, the community college options, the regional campuses that are in your communities, the public institutions, the privates. I mean, there is a type of institution for every different individual, and it just really depends on what you're looking for. And I think the commissioner hit on that a couple times, really doing that investment or doing that work to investigate and to research and to do all the things that you need to do to find your place. But there's definitely an institution in Indiana for every type of individual that's looking to make their life better.
Yeah, no question. But what the issue that we're up against is it's a microcosm of a larger issue, right? People don't want to do the research. They just want to be given whatever the headline is, and whatever the headline says, they run with that as fact. And that's why I was glad that the commission brought up like the world news rankings. Like if you really look into those, and not all the metrics are bad, but some of the metrics you're like, why is that an impact? And unfortunately, some people see those rankings and they make decisions on colleges because of those rankings. People are making decisions on not going to college because they see a headline that says it's no longer worth it. It's not true. It's not true. It just depends on the institution and your fit.
We talk about this a lot, right? Iron sharpens iron, right? We talk about that. I guess another thing I would leave people with is you talk to your people, right? And talk to individuals. I know Indiana very well. I know how many people are willing to help. I've seen it time and time again where people in our communities are ready to help you. It doesn't mean that you have to have everyone, and a lot of us won't, right? You may not have someone in your family that you can talk to about the next step in higher education. You may be the first generation college student. There is somebody in your community somewhere that's willing to help you, and they've never met you. And I think that's one of the things I love the most about Indiana, and the thing I love most about our community that we grew up in. There's just a lot of individuals that want to see you succeed. So I guess my main goal would be, if you're having any of these questions, heck, reach out to us. You can reach us at any time, right? Eddie, myself, Joe at nextstepin.org. Send us an email. We'll get you connected with me and Eddie, and we'll help you. I mean, just anything we can do to help people. We care about our communities. We care about the state. We want to see it continue to succeed. And we know that that's through increased educational attainment.
Right. I'm a public school employee. I am not hard to find. Shoot me an email, give me a call, and people do. I do have conversations with people outside of our school about college opportunities or training, and we didn't really get a chance to get into it with the commish, but I think 25%. This is nationally. Students coming out of high school are classified as like NEETs, right? They're not in education, they're not employment, they're not in a training. That's going to have significant impact on our economy, people. So we got to have these conversations and make sure that we can find the post-secondary training or degree obtainment that's going to fit for every Hoosier.
Yeah, well said. Well said. It was a great first guest episode, and we appreciate all of you that are following us on this journey and that tuned in for this episode too. We've got a lot more ahead over the next year as we continue to have great conversations with individuals who really are going to be able to add to this conversation. We thought it would be a really great way to start with Commissioner for Higher Education, because I think one of the things that impresses me, and Eddie, I'd be curious in your take on this, but there is so much happening in this space throughout the state. I mean, throughout the state level, throughout the individual college campuses down to the high school levels. I mean, there is so much work in this space that's happening to support these initiatives, and I really think that it's all going to come together in a way that's really going to help the state continue to thrive.
Yeah, no question. And it's just, again, battling the negative clickbait, right? People don't want to know about all the positive things that are happening, but let one negative thing and it'll go viral, right? So that's one of the points of this podcast, is bringing all of the positive things that are happening on college campuses and with our workforce and the alignment and the connections that are being made. So absolutely was impressed with the commish. What Other than his incredible service to our state and to our students, what also was really impressive with the commissioner was his playlist choice while he's out running. I mean, we're not going to end this without talking about Earth, Wind, and Fire.
I was
Solid choice.
impressed.
Solid choice.
Oh my gosh! Like I said, his approval rating in the state of Indiana went up just because of that pick. I was pretty impressed with that. And another thing, just to follow up on that, before I give you the last word, is really thinking about I love how he started it. Right, it all started with him as a family person that really cares deeply about his family and helping others. And one of the other things I was impressed with throughout the conversation was about his leadership ability. And when you think about running an organization like that, you could have a lot of people that have a lot of opinions about you. And I'm sure that he's heard them a lot this year as things continue to change. But he's grounded in the fact that he knows he cares about individuals. He cares about the state of Indiana. He wants to see us become a better state and a more healthy, a more just robust community that cares about its individuals. And so I really felt like that was a really great way to start his interview, was him really talking about himself as a person and what he does. I think that's important.
Oh, for sure. We got to always remember that we're more than our titles. So I was really happy to hear or see him lead with that. So, but I think that about does it for today's episode. If you are listening to this and today's episode brought any value to you or your life, do us a favor. Share the episode, subscribe, get someone else, share it with somebody so that we can help spread the word and all the positive things that are happening in our state. That's really going to help us with the algorithm, give us a high rating. The first episode, we asked you all to respond, and you did so in outstanding numbers. So, and that was just us two dorks going back and forth, right? We didn't have the Commissioner of Higher Education on. So if you could do us a favor, hit us with a subscribe, hit us with a share. We'd greatly appreciate it.
Well said, Eddie. Until next time, this has been Next Step In, where education meets opportunity. Have a great week, Hoosiers.